Hello. How are you? Excellent. Some people in the back are really great. Yeah, that's good. How did it go with the sculpting so far? Thumbs up all around? Better than expected? Good to hear. Huh? You did horribly. That's also great to hear. Anyone else? Someone else struggling? A bit. Yeah. So it's all brand new, right? Interface and everything. Of course, there's going to be a learning curve. But technically, what it is that you're doing is um, pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple, right? Technically, it's just getting used to all the clunks and the buttons, and being able to make some shapes inside of CGArt. Whoa. So yes, it's back to doing that. It was doing that last year all the time. This thing. It's been pretty good so far this year. So this is for you now to be more independent going forward. So we basically make use of what it is that we've been through now to start sculpting. And you will make by September 21st. Ah, that's the deadline for 3 humanoid character maquettes. So 3 full body sculpts. Yes, it's doable. Um, so the next session we have, though, will be October 5th. So by then, you will, you will also finish a concept maquette for your character for your main project. But there's a disclaimer here. So maybe some of you would want to be doing more hard surface things or sculpting. So I'm usually pretty flexible. You can just send me a message or something, and if you want to just check if your concept would be something that would be okay for the class. But I'm pretty flexible. As far as the requirements and everything, uh, well, the class just you're all supposed to have had CGArt1, so you're pretty familiar with topology and everything, and some art you've had art one. So it's just like as far as the requirements, I wouldn't worry too much about it. It honestly it will be okay, but you do need to put in the hours. This is uh, that's all. Make sure that you work efficiently at this. It might seem like you have a lot of time, but there, like we all know, no, it's not really a lot of time. It goes really quick. So, so yeah, I don't know. Are there any questions like regarding the, yeah? Okay, yeah. So we have the lab assignments, right? These are a part of the workload for the class. Like you call it Norwegian audit-based krav, which is you're supposed to do it. So it's for the amount of credits, there's a workload that needs to be met. Okay, so that's the workload, and it's not really assessed. It's like pass or fail. So if you do it, you do it. If you don't, see you next year. Or yeah, so that's that. So this is the final portfolio. This is what really matters. This matters in order for you to gain the knowledge and the skill set required to do this, right? That's my thinking. So that's why this is due a little bit before, because I really think you really have to get a little bit of experience in a short amount of time. Yeah. Hmm. this mandates you to do 3. You should do more. You should just sculpt a little bit. If you really want to, you don't have to. If you really want to get good at sculpting, you should get into the habit of, like I said yesterday, the mindset should be, okay, I'm just going to sit down, I'm going to work for a couple hours. You don't have to think, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to make the most amazing sculpt. You can have that motivation, but I think you're better off thinking, sounds boring, but there's just a lot of work. And there's something about the quantity of the work that you do. So you do, instead of always like perfecting the one work, start over, try again, sort of analyze what could you improve upon. So that's that. So these are not really graded, right? These are just for you to do. If you do, yeah. This is what really matters. So I will be like, oh, another question. Oh, yeah, of course. Yes. Yeah. So that's a great question. You can make anything. So it could be based on like a mix between a bat and a pig, or a human and a horse, or whatever. Yeah. Or whatever you can, whatever you want to do. It's all about your imagination. Yep. Yes. Yeah, the thing with using a mouse is that you have no pressure. So when you click the button, it's 1 or 0. So there's literally no pressure. If you had a mouse with pressure, like the tablet has, what is it, like 2048 points of pressure or something, a lot of pressure sensitivity. If you had a mouse with that, yeah, you could use a mouse. But you need the pressure, that's the thing. So when you're sculpting in ZBrush, you're totally reliant on having pen pressure. Yes, on your reading list there's a book by Scott Spencer, which I haven't read. But I've read, I mentioned it in class, the first class, I read another one by him, which I like. I kind of like Scott Spencer's books because he's very thorough, and he's also sort of classically trained. So it's interesting how he makes connections between, uh, that's not him. There's also an American author. Well, that's nice. Maybe that's why, anyway. Yeah. So now she is called Madeline. So he changed sex. So she is a really wonderful artist. I think she works at Weta. And now she also has something on Gnomon. Uh, yeah. Yeah, anyways, so yeah, you can find it in the reading list, the book, and then let me see if I. Yeah, so this is the one I have, which I like. So he talks about some like traditional. So you can see it's a little old school. So this was before Dynamish, and it doesn't really matter. But he talks about some just concepts, like you can use like a planar analysis and like simplifying forms, also like primary, secondary, tertiary stages of sculpting. Just so it's pretty interesting. So it's more than just like a technical manual, because that can be a little boring. So, and other than that, I think I would just get busy watching the ZBrush Summit videos, which I think are all excellent. This is really, really great. So, any other questions or doubts or concerns? Yeah, so technically, and this goes for everything, you do have until the end date, because this is a portfolio based, there's no exam, it's a portfolio. So technically you have until December 8th. But what you're delivering is a written report. Okay, so your delivery is a written report. So technically, you're not submitting the files. You will submit you'll put them on the server, so we have them, of course, but technically you don't. Technically, you're delivering the report. So that also means if you want to challenge the grade, for instance, it goes to a different examinator, and then they'll get the report. So if it's not in the report, you didn't do it. So, some students unfortunately don't really understand this sometimes, and it really hurts their grade because if we don't see it in the report, we can't really credit the student because we don't even know if the student did the work. So if you just submit a finished model, it's like, okay, great, And I could assess it if I had a very small group of like 8 people, and I know what everyone's doing. It was a pretty big class, and also for the external examiner, he or she wouldn't know anything. So it needs to be in your report. And just like in CGArt1, I will be posting a very detailed document concerning your final portfolio delivery. Yeah, but that's why you do need to, I would highly recommend you stick to these deadlines because, first of all, you need to in order to finish, I think. But second of all, it's for your report. So do keep a lot of iterations of your work so that you can go back in time when you write the report and keep copies of your files. So yeah, it's all very, very important because if you show up on the last day and all your files are gone and the only thing you have to submit is the final piece, it could actually be a bit of a problem. You do you do have to show it both in pictures and really document the work. Yeah. Other concerns? Yeah. Oh, I did? Oh. Oh yeah, make final presentation renders. Yeah, what I mean by that is like making, well, you can do anything you want, but there's a way I showed in the previous lecture to do the render passes. Remember the BPR render passes? If you go back to the lecture, you'll see it, but there's under render, you can tear the menu off. Under BPR render pass. So anyway, so you click the BPR button if you have a scene here. That stands for best preview render. And then it will show up here. You click it once so you can export a Photoshop document. And then there's clever ways of compositing the artwork in Photoshop. So I showed briefly sort of the basics of it in one of the lectures. Yeah, when we did the bust, when I did that. So, and that's really nice. The greatest thing would, of course, be if we had Keyshot, which is just a really amazing solution because you one click and you send it to this beautiful render engine, and it's very simple to use. But you can also do pretty impressive stuff if you just use some clever compositing in Photoshop. So that's what I mean by rendering. Even if you just click BPR and do a screenshot, technically that would be a render. But if you want to push it a little further, that would be encouraged because this is all about making your presenting your work in the best way possible, right? So other things. Yeah, so going forward then until next time I see you, you will just need to be structuring your time wisely and make sure because next time be very, very technical. I see that now there's not a lot of people here, so I don't really mandate you to be here unlike some other people. It's just like if I record things anyways, but if you're here, you can obviously ask questions, which is helpful. But I think probably maybe a lot of people know already the ZBrush sculpting Dynamesh things. And it's really not so technical, like I said. It's just what we're doing now. It's more about you applying the time, just producing some artwork. So, but next time will be more technical. So, just very technical. So just starting to make what you have and turn it into a production-ready model. So making the topology, making the UVs. If you're VFX people, you will be making UDIMs. So UDIMs are like if you have a full-body creature and you want to do a high-resolution render, which we want to be doing in Arnold, then we can't have just one 4K map, for instance, for the character. And it's very impractical to work with really high resolutions because it just becomes too heavy. So if you have like a 12K map, it's not really, or 32K, you can, but it's not really practical. So we'd rather have more 4K maps. So for a full body, you can have, well, if you're doing like a scene in Lord of the Rings for a hero creature, you'd have literally like 100 4K maps. It's not uncommon for a full body. So that just means the camera can go very close on the character and you can be watching it in 4K and the textures will hold up. So then we have to talk about texel density and sort of how you can plan. Hopefully you'll not be making 100 UDIMs, but maybe you want to try to make 8 or something. Just depends on your render. So these are all very, it's doable. You all know UVs, hopefully. If some of you here don't really feel too confident about UV mapping and topology and all of that, I highly recommend you also do repeat some of the lectures from CGArt1, which are also online, because we don't spend any time on the basics. All that to point out that if you don't have your model by then, it would be really highly preferable for you to have it ready. So then you can just start and make it into the production model that you need. Because this is not the same thing as you're doing now. This is very different. This is not like you don't have to make 5 production models. If you make one, you sort of know how to do it. It's not an artistic thing. This is more, you just have to do it in order to be rendering it. So I will finally have you do, obviously, just one production model. It should have animation-friendly topology. There's UVs, UDIMs if needed, so that's optional. If you're in games, you don't really need UDIMs. Yeah, and then you do a presentation render of sorts, and that could be in Arnold, or if you want to put it in a game engine and see what it looks like, you can do that. And so baking, then you'll be baking normal maps instead of displacement maps, probably. So it's pretty interesting, this workflow. But it's all based on the artwork that you're doing. This is not going to make it great. The next session is just going to make sure that the amazing artwork that you make will look the same, hopefully as close as possible, in Arnold or a game engine. Right? It's not going to make it better. Right. And when that's done, we're doing surfacing, so texturing basically, but thinking about a little bit more than we did in CGArt1. We're talking about physically based rendering. And again, if you don't have the UVs ready, if you don't have the production model, you can't really start the texturing process. So these milestones are really kind of essential for you to work, I think. Right? Is it becoming clear? But for the final portfolio piece, you can also, so you're supposed to have done this already, so I hope you gathered some ideas and inspiration. This is a very important point, so try to also think, like I said, it could be anything. So if you want to place your character in a setting, you can combine techniques from Maya, put models into ZBrush. Yeah. So I think we'll look more about also that stuff next session. So going back and forth a little bit. But now it should be all about ZBrush, I think, for you guys. ZBrush. So do you have any technical questions or issues that you'd like us to have a look at in ZBrush? Something that you've struggled with, or? No? All all good. Okay. All right. Well, that's yeah. I'm sorry. Oh yeah. You can. Let me. Oh, like a mat? Yeah. Okay. So let's look at that. So I sculpted a little bit after the session yesterday with the character I started. Uh, yeah. I I didn't have time to do the feet, so I cut them off. Yeah, so your question, how do you make like a color? Okay, so you have various materials, right? So when you click here, so these are the matte cap materials. It means that they have light information baked into them. So if I click here, it fills the object. And then if I try to change the light direction, you see nothing will happen because all the light is baked into the material. So then I could go material, I can tear the menu off, and I can go modifiers, and I do have some settings here so I can play around with the settings of the material. I can also change, yeah, you can change the light direction here. So you have all these sliders. So those are all the matte caps, and you can also find very great matte caps online. So various artists have spent a lot of time and effort making beautiful materials. Some of these are really nice. So the standard materials, these are reactive to light, so you can change the light direction. So for a flat color, you have something called flat color. And then you can change the color to whatever you want. So, or just like if you wanted to do that in Photoshop, you could do a render pass with a BPR render, and then you also have the mask, right? So I could just saturate the mask in Photoshop. This is one click, and then you save the BPR mask. So, okay, so if you want to, let's say you want to have different materials. Right, so if this were me and I finished, oh, I am me, but if this were me writing a report, I would have had everything I need because I have all the iterations, right? So opening the first version, I kept when you save the file, you can keep the undo history, which makes it makes for very, very large files. So that's also another reason why you probably don't want to just save one and the same file. Um, you save the undo history of one iteration, and then the next iteration clear the undo history. So you'll have a clean slate, but then that iteration will have its own undo history. So you can go back to the start of that iteration, you know what I mean? So you don't keep everything in one file because that will be a tremendously large file. It would take very, very long to open, and it might not, you know, maybe it won't even open. That would be sad. So, but this one, check it for the first iteration if you want to keep going back in time. So this is where I started with the C-sphere rig. I would have documented that in the report because this is the initial posture. Sort of maybe explain what kind of a feeling I wanted to give to the posture and things like that. So going forward, just doing, this is all the primary stage, like roughing out forms. So you'd have to sort of make your own judgment on how often would you make an image here, but you know, roughing out musculature. So you need to document every step of the way. I don't want 1,000 pictures in the report. That's not the point. But at just crucial stages, just show the progress. So then, so you see, it already takes a while to open. Because of all the undo steps. Okay. I'm just gonna fast forward here, so see what I have over here. But you get the idea. So you really want to spend the time, go back. Maybe that's a little too far. So, all right. So what I would have done though, which I see that I didn't do. Sometimes I like to make notes. So here, this is version 7. No, it's version 09. And this is when I started adding accessories. There's not a lot of accessories to this character. It's just he has a shirt on and pants. But anyways, this is the iteration where I'm happy with the body, and now I'm starting with the accessories. So I would have added the same notation probably, I don't know where, maybe here, where I'm done with the primary shape. So like for instance, version 06, I would say underscore secondary. So I would know, okay, that's where I was starting the secondary sculpt detail. So yesterday, all that we did was, establish primary shapes. So we're thinking about the silhouette, the main volumes of the character, the posture, spending a lot of time on that. And then after the session, all I did was do secondary detail, which is really just refining, building upon the same, and just refining with a higher resolution in the Dynamesh, gradually going up. But it's nothing crazy. I don't go really high in the Dynamesh because I like keeping this relatively light. So there's no exact number for this. It will vary with your mesh. But I set this to 400, and you can see it's still pretty crude. If I go in here, you can still see the polys. It's definitely not at a very high resolution, but it keeps it smooth and nice when I'm working. So yesterday I mentioned if you press comma, you can go to brush, smooth, and you do have a smooth, stronger brush. I think this brush is really necessary when you work with higher subdivision in the Dynamesh. So if you double click it, it'll say, now this brush will be selected when you hit Shift key. Okay, now if I hit Shift, that will be the active smooth brush, smooth stronger. And that's what it does, it just smooths stronger. So you can have a very high dense mesh, but still be able to all we're doing is that we're exaggerating form. So we're building volume, subtracting volume, and then smoothing it out. So it's really crucial to be able to smooth. So if I'm just working with the standard smooth brush on the higher subdivision levels, I have to sit there and click like 10 times in order to smooth things down. It gets really annoying. So just go in there, go into the light box, brush, smooth stronger, you'll find it. And there's some other smooth brushes as well. Some of these that won't really, well, these are more for tertiary detailing when you start adding finer detail, but you can set the brush to only be smoothing out the peaks, so it'll leave the cavities still there, things like that. Pretty interesting. So, but technically though, since I'm not showing you, I'm not sitting here sculpting today, which I would have liked to do, but it would have taken a couple hours. Maybe we'll, you can also watch online, the ZBrush Summit things and artists that are much more efficient than I am. But sometimes it's worthwhile, I think, watching some artists work live or not at an accelerated speed. Because there's a lot of these tutorials and you play it back and it's like, here I'm working and it's like 10 times the speed and that's okay, but try watching at least once something that's real time, because I think it could be quite instructional, just to see how much noodling around you actually have to do. When you watch those high speed ones, it just seems like everything is perfect. But everything, you just have to keep at it, and keep being analytical. So also in this stage, I referred a lot back to the anatomical reference. Just kept refining the musculature more and more. But technically, it's the same thing. So it's using, the clay buildup. I personally like the Damian standard, so BDS, just to refine forms. Um, Also, you have the pinch brush. Let me try just to mention like the crucial brushes. Pinch, pinch is sometimes nice. So let's see here. I decided on a later stage. I actually went in and I thought the legs were a little too thick. So then I can go first with a pinch brush, with a kind of a low C intensity. Pressing U, I can access C intensity. So S for draw size, U for C intensity, and O for the focal shift. But if so pinch, and if I carefully go and, whoops, you see, it will just pinch the mesh together. So if I exaggerate it, it will really pinch it. So this is a kind of interesting effect. So and otherwise, pretty hard to do. Yeah, so it really just pinches the brush, no, pinches the mesh together. And then the opposite of that would be, so now that's a bit of a bold design like we talked about yesterday. A lot of these designs can be a bit like generic. So you'll hear, if you start watching some, I would really recommend you start watching some other artists do the work. You'll hear people talk a lot about like being a bit bold in the design so that you're making something that stands out a little bit. And then taking this just from a standard, your basic humanoid form, see if you can exaggerate some of it, but it still needs to sort of feel like a whole. It needs to feel like it belongs to the same model. But that's a totally different take. So if I can like Shift S, drop this down, and now I go back in time on that one, so I can compare, and I can see if I like that direction or not. So it's a very efficient way of judging early on, is this a direction that you like or not? And that's like a 5-minute work, and just, okay, let me try to tweak things, working with the proportions. Totally different silhouette, very, very different design. So obviously, small changes make for a great impact when you do it overall. So Shift S is kind of a very neat feature. Drop it down to the canvas. So then Control N, I'm back to this guy. I can go forward in time again. Okay, so that's the pinch brush. It's very helpful. Oh, question? Yeah, Shift S. So initially it'll seem like it bugged out because it drops things down to the canvas. Right. Oh, it's probably just my pronunciation. Shift S. S. Yeah. Did I say Shift F? That will initiate the wireframe. You'll see the wireframe. So the opposite of pinch is inflate. So BIN, you have the inflate brush, and that will just like blow air into the mesh and blow it up. So you can be a bit careful with that. I'm going to turn down the C intensity to make him bulky. So you see, it needs to be in harmony with everything. So probably needs to be a bit more bulky overall. So the inflate, quite nice. So there's a totally different direction again. Yeah, so the pinch, inflate, Damian standard. So what I use that for is to go in here and sort of accentuate some of these details, but pretty subtly I can turn down the C intensity quite a bit and then smooth things out. See, I need a lower intensity on the smooth brush. So hold shift, that has its own C intensity slider. So I like keeping things relatively subtle though, right? I don't really, you can accentuate the musculature, but then you can also, after you've done that, just completely smooth things out, especially if it's more also a bit fatty tissue. It's just that, yeah, you have that underlying anatomy, but you don't really need to accentuate all the muscles, because a lot of this will be also tertiary detailing when you start adding wrinkles and pores and things, which you don't have to do that for the concept maquette. You don't really have to go so far to add a lot of tertiary details because that we could do that later, preferably with some alphas and look at that. And also, obviously, the texturing stage. So, yeah. So that's the Damien standard. And then also, sometimes I like using trim dynamic. So BTD. Trim dynamic will feel very different. It makes for like flat shapes. But sometimes when you work, I'll do this sometimes. If I'm kind of struggling with a shape, I find that if so this is called like planar analysis. So if you read the Scott Spencer book, he'll talk about that. But it's more like you have to simplify the forms. So now this starts looking a little bit like you saw that video of Danny Williams, works at Disney, where you're making more of these exaggerated forms. So the trim dynamic is pretty great for that. But also if you're making smooth, just more realistic models, sometimes it helps to do this planar analysis first. So you're rough in the shapes, so it becomes more geometric, and then you can start like taking that down. So I'll do that sometimes if I'm struggling to establish a shape, because it helps me to see the geometrical shape, and then you smooth it out and you take it back down. So that's the trim dynamic. Sometimes you can use pinch for things like that as well. So if I want to, you can also use the pinch for stuff like this. So let's say, for instance, I first go to the Damien standard and I have a really high C intensity, really low brush. And maybe I need more resolution for this, but I could start adding something like this. I'm just doing this very rough, so you get the idea. But I want this more narrow, so it just feels like a little crevice. I don't want that huge gap. And I really like pinching that together, like afterwards. It makes it feel like, and you sort of see it lumps together, and it's kind of hard to achieve sometimes. Well, that doesn't look too great, but you get the idea. So like making little crevices like that. So sometimes you can exaggerate them and then pinch them back together. So the pinch is useful also for that. If you are making more exaggerated models, like the trim dynamic, like I said, BTD. Okay, so now I'm in, oh no. Oh, dynamic subdivision was enabled. So if I press D by mistake, remember it will enter dynamic subdivision. Don't want that. So when you're working, if you find that, oh, nothing works, you're probably entered dynamic subdivision. So if I do something really crazy, so let's see, maybe he's wearing some armor. So this would be more like hard surface sculpting techniques, which I don't do a lot. Andre is really good at this, so if you want to ask for some tips on hard surface modeling, Andre, the TA, he is the guy. But anyway, so I could do this, and then also I can use the pinch to help, lower C intensity, and I can pinch that together. And then when I recompute the Dynamesh, it will start making that shape. So I can make like an armor. Did we? No, we didn't really. Let's see. So under stroke, you also have some settings. Lazy mouse. So like I said, like we've been talking about, a lot of these brushes, they're just like custom brushes. Someone took the time to go into the standard brush and do a whole bunch of settings. So you change, You change this, see the Damien standard, change the Pacific Alpha. You might go in here and change some of the brush settings, like the curve settings, the depth settings for the brush. If you're interested, you can go in here and figure these things out for yourself and make your own custom brushes. But Lazy Mouse is just like one of those features that some of these brushes will have enabled. Like for instance, fold brush. The fold brush is to make folds and drapery like in clothing. So you see that when I make a stroke, you'll get that red line. And then it averages out the pen stroke. So that could be really great for also doing these more smoother shapes. And there's so anyways, but then I can go to the Damien standard, and this I'm just going to enable manually the Lazy Mouse feature, and then you can play around with this, you know, like various options, backtrack, snap to track. Let's see. So now I can make, oops. So I don't really do this too much, but you could be pretty creative with this. So I can draw, now the Lazy Mouse is active. I have backtrack, snap to track, line. That means I can first draw a line, and then I backtrack. Whoops. I need to follow, okay, so track curvature. It's going to track the curvature of the mesh. So it's going to try to keep a line there, even though the mesh is, then I go back and forth. I can create a line. And then, so you could do pretty convincing shapes actually, and then I can pinch that together. So if I had like a suit, and that could be the seam, so BDS, so backtrack, I'm going to track up. There's other ways of doing straight lines now, I forget. But this is one of the ways you can do it, and then pinch it together. So you see, everything potentially then could be in the sculpt. So I could add some folds. So just imagine this is a suit he's wearing. So probably want to turn off symmetry so I don't have like perfectly symmetrical folds. Pressing X, turning off the symmetry. Yeah, so again, just all about the sculpting, spending time with this, making some reference. I forget if I put it on the reading list, but you can put, you know, there's books on drapery, but you can find it online. You can read up on the effects of drapery in different types of clothing. Like you'd have to think about like what's the material of the suit? Is it leather or, you know, it would really depend on what kind of material it is, like what kind of drapery would happen to it. How thick is the material? If it's very, very thin, you'd have much finer folds. So I could do, whoops, BFO, like the really fine folds. Yeah, just stretching. So yeah, what else? There's just a lot here you can go in and experiment with. So but if you're accessorizing the character, let me open. So I made a lot of changes to this guy. So I made him a, you know, see I changed quite a bit the proportions. So he's a bit leaner, a bit more pleased with the legs. So but I accessorized him a little bit, so he has like a shirt and pants. So here he is. Okay, so that's an artifact due to the Transpose Master. So let me talk about that. You gotta be on the right subtool. Yeah, so we mentioned the Transpose Master yesterday, and you saw Danny Williams, the video we watched. He made like a C-sphere rig, and then he could move the C-spheres inside of the character and have it bend. But I don't really do that too much, but you can still use the Transpose Master to do a quick pose for your character. Let's see. So this could be a bit labor intensive, having to retopologize, but totally doable. Oops. So it can all be in the sculpt. You know, it can all be in the Dynamesh sculpt. So you can think that, well, I'm gonna, I don't, how do I say this? It feels tricky probably when you start out with the Dynamesh and just everything has to be sculpted. Well, you don't necessarily have to sculpt everything. You can model something in Maya, but potentially you could have. This is still pretty rough. This is still like a secondary stage, and then you would do a final tertiary stage, and I go in here and refine the forms even further, add like clothing patterns and skin pores and wrinkles, and really take this to the next level. But so for a conceptual sculpt, this is enough. But this is all just relatively rough Dynamesh sculpt, but it works at this distance. It shows the concept, and there's a bit of a dynamic pose, so it's not just a really boring T pose, which you can't. You need to breathe some life into the character. It has to do with the posture. Really tells also a lot about the emotions of the character. You know, is it confident? Is it a hero or a villain or a coward? Or is he scared or is he threatening? He or she? All these things. So this is a very relaxed, idle, neutral pose. So he seems pretty confident. You know, his shoulders are going to back, his postures, So all these things really matter, really breathes life into the character. So it matters for your presentation render. The posture is really important. So let me just, I guess, what should, yeah, okay, so I was talking about all the brushes. There's really that's really it. So I actually used the fold brush to add some folds, some simple folds for the shirt and the pants. Didn't spend a whole lot of time with it. I could have looked at it further, so I would have spent time just honing in on the shirt, do some reference search. So like I said yesterday, for all these parts, also for the hands, I didn't bother doing a reference. His four fingers. But I could have done like a reference of a hand and spent a lot of time fleshing out the hand. But I like being a bit rough with this at this stage. But then I would go in and refine. And then you'd look up a lot of references. So also for the shirt, you look at different types of fabric. But just to show you technically then with the fold brush, BFO, I think about pressure points. So like here with his pecs, the shirt is resting on here. So that's like a pressure point. It wouldn't be, well, you could, but probably wouldn't be a lot of folds here. But here you have an area that comes right down from that pressure point. So what I do is you can just rough in like a fold there. And then you take it down, you remove it from the pressure point, and then gradually it will recede into the fabric again. And then I can take down the C intensity a lot for the smooth brush. So you keep adding fold, but then you could also sculpt folds manually, so clay buildup. Yeah, so for those especially interested, you can read up on drapery. But you can pretty quickly rough in. So maybe if you're doing like a character for an animation, maybe this shirt would be simulated eventually. You'd still have the mesh for it, and then you could simulate it. But if you're doing a game or a presentation render or anything, a lot of times, a lot of the folds, and also for film, some of the folds and the details can just be baked down, and you'd apply it in the normal map. And you could also have like you could do different poses and do slightly different folds, and then you could blend between the folds, different approaches. But you should definitely be able to sculpt different types of surfaces, clothing being one of them. So, anyways, so that's really it for technically trying to think. Yeah, okay, so yeah, I also like slashed just quickly into the shirt. Then I used the BS3 just as a slash brush. It's kind of nice. So I turned down the draw size, turned up the C intensity, and see what it does. It will slash into. So if you were injured, I could do. So whoops, maybe. My shirt would be really torn up here, and then I could have added in the texturing. I could say I want some sort of a wound underneath, which could be kind of neat. And so on his body, that would correspond, right? So add, yep. And if you want, you can also get started poly painting. We haven't really talked too much about it, but you know that we also have RGB. So if I go out of CGArt, I can go to RGB. So if I fill, if you look at Scott Spencer's book, at least the one, like I said, I should have read the new one obviously before I suggested it. But I think he probably will talk about some techniques for poly painting, how it sort of relates to the way you can build up color when you're working with practical masks. So you can build up color in a way that you will sort of mimic the effect of subsurface scattering. So subsurface scattering just means that light will actually penetrate the skin, right? And it will, light enters the skin. So it gives it this sort of a bit translucent, so subsurface quality. So it just means that you can build up the like an underpaint. So I would just refer you to to his book then. But you can like make some areas warmer or colder. So you literally add like red colors or blue colors in the underpaint, and then you gradually build up layers of paint. So you end up with something that looks kind of like a subsurface scatter quality to the paint. But that's more like painting techniques. So we're not really covering that too much because we're probably going to be rendering this eventually, or we will. So anyway, so I start painting. So I can paint straight onto the mesh with RGB, and I select the color. So for this, quickly, let me just fill it with some sort of color. So I can fill. And now it's set to RGB, so this is going to fill the object with this color. Just to quickly show you, like if I had, let me change it to a skin material. So if I wanted to start playing around with what, like in the look deving here, if he's wounded here, what would that sort of be like? You get the idea. It's fun to paint in ZBrush. Oops. So everywhere where the colors keep, oh, and then there's the RGB intensity. We can turn that down. Now the colors are more, or less opaque. And probably back to white. So this is, it's very unlike Photoshop or something. You just have, there's no layers. You're assigning color values directly on the vertices, RGB values to the vertices. So it's also unlike something like TopoGun, where you're actually projecting textures down to UV space, which will then appear on your model. This model has no UVs. I'm just painting directly on the vertices. It's pretty powerful, pretty interesting. So you can do amazing work with polypaint. let me fill the eyes because that's bothering me. I'm gonna fill color. Oh, my, I can also change the material for them while I'm at it. So there we go. So it's gonna fill material and RGB. I'm just gonna fill object. I'm just showing this in case some of you want to get started with this because you can also paint in ZBrush and convert this later on to an image map. But okay, there's some steps involved. So I would, yeah, okay, yeah, we can probably bake the RGB values from the Dynamesh down to the retopologized mesh, but you can also hold off with the painting until you have a retopologized version, though. But for a quick conceptual thing, you can play around with it. It could help sell your idea, you know. So breathe a little bit more life into him. So if you see Scott Spencer's stuff, he'll work a lot with like spray, and I think he also uses like a primer and a secondary color. It's just applying paint in a bit different way, so you can. Yeah. But a little bit of color can go a long way. At least for your, like, maybe he's wounded. Yeah, whatever. So, not going to spend time on this. But, especially, what am I saying? I don't know. Okay, great. And then you could do the whole render best preview passes, send it to Photoshop, keep playing around. You can make some pretty interesting conceptual art. So that was all the brushes, like slash, pinch, so clay buildup, pinch, slash. I'm trying to think if there was any, like technically anything else. I don't think so. I think that it's pretty straightforward. Sometimes what I'll do though is I will like make masks, so holding control. This time not to recompute the Dynamesh, but hold control and actually do a mask over the mesh. Then you can control click it to make it smoother. If I can control click out here, it will invert the mask. And then I'll use like the transpose tools. So I'm in move and I just draw this out onto the mesh. And then I could do rotate or scale. So the scaling things, or if I just move it, I will also scale it. So sometimes that's also nice if I want to play around with the dimensions here. If I don't always want to just be using the move brush. Yeah, so, okay. So let me show you then how I did. Okay, let me save this. It's kind of interesting. So this is when I started adding accessories. So I guess this should be. Oh no, I do need the accessories. Okay. Yeah, so that was the end of the secondary sculpt for the body. Just I was kind of pleased with it at that point. Just so. Yeah, although I say don't really overwork it, I will also say that you probably don't take too many shortcuts. So if you're in the primary stage, try to tell yourself, well, I'm going to be working for a couple hours on the primary stage. I'm going to really try it. Don't have too much of that was yesterday I did the primary stage, right? Don't have too much resolution in the Dynamesh. Keep things light. Keep thinking about the silhouette. Keep analyzing also the negative space we talked about, like the curvature of all the contours. everything we talked about yesterday. So, but try to not, don't, you might be tempted to start adding details too soon, but at least spend like a couple hours on the primary stage. Then you tell yourself, okay, now I'm going to spend a couple hours on the secondary stage, which is just refining, 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 but also not at a ridiculously high level of detail. You see, this is still relatively rough. You can see the polys, but I have more to sculpt with. But I'm not subdividing the Dynamesh to something crazy. Still pretty light. And then only when I'm done with the secondary stage does it make sense to me to start adding accessories. And then it becomes a very joyful process to add accessories because we have a great foundation. So I showed you this briefly yesterday and also the video you saw with Danny Williams. But you can make masks and just extract them. So if I quickly show you now, I can mask. I'm just going to repeat the same thing. I can do a mask here, and I can mask up here. So, and also I can hold control and paint directly on the model. Control. And to subtract from the mask, I can hold Control Alt. So if he's wearing like a strange suit, or keep holding Control, add to the mask. Okay, and then go down here. So you can keep refining the mask until you're pleased with it. And then go down here under Subtool, Extract. And this is set to thickness. So it's at the 0.02. I'm going to turn this down to 0.01. I don't want this to be very thick. And then Extract. When you hit Extract, it's still not a mesh. It's just like previewing it. So when you start toggling around, that's because you can keep perfecting the mask and just see, okay, what does that look like? And then, okay, now I need to remove something here. I'm going to hold Control, and Alt to remove from the mask. So let me remove down here. Oh, that's looking scary. Let's do that. Okay, whatever. And then Extract. So you get the idea. And then when you're pleased, you hit Accept. So then it will create a new mesh. You see in the Subtool palette, you click the mesh, and you still haven't, yeah, question? Oh, I just undo, Control Z, yeah. So, yeah, so you get a mask, and then I can go hold Shift and smooth out the edges here if I want. It's kind of nice feature before I delete the mask. Now he has a strange swimsuit or something. So I can clear the mask, hold Control, and drag on the side. So the mask on the body is still active. So just be aware of that. So I can select the body and Control, and now it's gone. And that's it. And then now we have a separate subtool. It's its own mesh. I can turn off this. This is it. And obviously, it's just like really adhering to the forms of the body. But then I would start taking all these forms and altering it, thinking about what kind of fabric this is, maybe adding some cloth, turn off, or some drapery, some folds and things, turning off symmetry probably. So just smoothing things out. So, and this also would be, take some time, do some reference, look at some clothing, see, try to, again, be analytical, just see the drapery, observe the folds, see where do they form and how do they form. What are they actually doing? So anyways, spend a lot of time with that, sculpting. Take away probably a lot of this detail, because this is, so now he's ready for the beach. Or bed. Maybe it's like a pajama thing. He's going to bed. All right. So So when you accessorize the guy, you can still actually alter the contours and you can still play around with it, but it's a bit more difficult. You see, let's now say I want to change this curve. So I can go to this subtool and change it, but then I will obviously reveal the body because I'm just moving this guy. Or I can move the body, but then I'm not moving the clothing. So that's why we have the Transpose Master I showed yesterday. Transpose Master. It's very simple. It's under C plugin, Transpose Master. I can hit T-Pose Mesh. It will throw all the subtools, and I could have like 100 subtools, and it will throw everything inside one sculptable subtool. And now I can move things as if they're all together. So I can make drastic changes. And yeah, just move everything together. Very nice feature. Pretty indispensable feature if you want to be doing this changes after you've accessorized the character, which is very often something you want to do, right? This is never perfect. You keep iterating, 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 iterating. So this is how you do that after you add accessories. And then when you're happy, just go C plugin, T-pose to subtools, and it will do a process, and it will calculate, and it will shift the position of all the subtools, and now you're back. So now we just have standard meshes again. So that's also how you can do postures and more of a dynamic pose. So again, like on the video with Danny Williams, he did this as well, but he activated something called C-sphere rig. So it makes it a little more complex. You have to be careful about the placement of C-spheres, and you can actually, it's much like building like a skeleton in Maya, like you tried, and then, yeah. But there's less of a skinning process. It's just about how big are the C-spheres. Yeah. Watch his video. I don't really do that. I do this. So I can T-pose the mesh, but I can still make poses. But what I do is that I use masking. So if I want to, let's say I want to move the arm a little bit, this arm. So I don't want this perfect symmetrical dead pose for my presentation. So then I go and do a mask. So I can mask this area and I mask this area, holding control, just adding to the mask. And then a nice trick is to hold shift, or actually, yeah, so you sort of quickly tap shift, and then you can move your pen up and down. So it's quickly tap shift, move your pen up and down. You can rotate. If you don't tap shift, it will do this, right? But if you tap shift, it will do that. So then I can do this, sort of place this where I want, and then keep adding to the mask. Do this, keep adding to the mask. And then, yeah, so take some time, make that mask just the way you want it. So you can also hold control, just paint directly on. If you press B, M, you have different mask brushes. Mask circle, mask curve, all these things. Then I can hit control and click inside the mask to, you see, it starts smoothing out the mask. I really want that kind of a smooth effect. Another way to smooth the mask is to go down to masking and hit blur mask. It will start blurring the mask. So then I can, again, just click W to access the transpose tools, and I can draw out the tool, hit R for rotate, and then rotate the arm. So you see, this is just like skinning in Maya. Just you have to be really careful, go in there and paint the mask just the way you want it. But, and it's a little tedious, but it's definitely much quicker than having to rig this. If I just want a quick pose, it's okay, not that bad. And then the other tip with the rotate. So the elbow is not a rotational joint, right? The elbow is just like a hinge. Your shoulder is pivoting, is rotating, but your elbow is not. So you got to be a little careful where the elbow rotates, right? So just sort of from here, but then I can hold Alt if I want, and then I can rotate from that pivot, which is kind of nice. So if I just hit, I can also do this, drag a new rotational tool, and then do another masking. But I can just do this, hit Alt inside of the rotate, and it will rotate around that pivot. I like that feature. It's nice for like joints, or yeah. Also at the feet, like if I wanted to straighten out the feet, I would do draw this and then use Alt. You see, I can. It's really nice for like joints and hold it. Just press Alt. Oops. And all right. So yeah. So then you keep going, and I can like mask out this. If I want to maybe rotate the whole upper body a little bit, and that's more like the pose that I finally made. I can hold Shift, it will draw it out in the center, and then go to the side. So I keep pressing Shift to snap, right? Snap to the orthographic views. I can also press P to turn off perspective while I'm doing this right now. And then go to press R for rotate, and then hold Shift, and I can rotate the whole upper body a little bit. Or move it forward if maybe it's like a bit of a threatening pose, like or if a curious pose, if he's like observing something. Then I'll also, like if I just want to move the head, I will clear the mask, and I'll just mask the portion I want to move, and then I'll invert the mask. Control click outside, and then control click inside the mask, blur, blur, blur. Back to move, or I'm sorry, draw. Press Q, and then keep drawing the mask. Click, 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 click. All right, and then maybe move the head up a little. Just rotate, and then have him look over there, a curious pose. So you can see you can really breathe a lot of interesting. You have to breathe life into the character. Keep working with the pose. And it's also a very important step and a little bit time consuming. You have to really get used to this. Like because you have to also go in and alter the shapes. You can't just move it, and it's a process. And then T-pose 2 subtools. But this is something I would just do at the very end. I'm used to just sculpting things pretty static, and sometimes I'll do a pose early on to get the feel for it, but then I'll go back to the symmetrical version and keep sculpting. And then I know that, okay, at the end I can look forward to adding more of a dynamic pose for my thing. Right. But make sure you do save a version, obviously, of the sculpt that's, oh, so it's completed. That's symmetrical, right? So it's important when we're going to be constructing the production ready mesh, we don't want this. Then want the A pose. Some people do a T pose. I prefer doing an A pose. So it's a more natural position of the shoulders. Yeah, so that's it. So then, yeah, so you saw me doing T-pose 2 subtools. It will move all the subtools back, and now it's just a normal model. It has all the subtools. So that's what I was doing for the final step for this guy, just establishing a little bit more interesting pose. It's just like looking there. So I pushed the arms back quite a bit. Pushing the shoulder blades back. Right. So yeah, the next step for you guys is to gradually take your primary shape sculpts, like the full body sculpts, add more subdivision to the Dynamesh. Not too much, but more, so that you can keep refining, keep refining, keep refining, keep refining. And it's just like, it's not this great divide. Now you're in a different world. Now you're in the secondary. It's just the same process, but it helps to organize it a little bit. So that you establish the silhouette, first you establish all the main volumes and the main pose and everything. And now you're refining. But you're being analytical at a smaller scale. So you would still have to refer back to anatomical reference, like when you're defining all the musculature, you need to be observant of how they really appear to be. what else should I mention? So for the airs, yeah, so sometimes it's helpful, like when you're in, this is still probably then in more like a secondary stage. I didn't even have airs for him until, yeah, there he has airs. But anyways, so, whoops. So you can add like bin, you can insert a cube. And that's what I did for the airs, actually. I just inserted a cube and then, well, I did not do it symmetrically, so turn off symmetry, just added a cube. And then I can use the transpose tools to like make that cube the way I want. Bit tedious, like everything. And then I have something there I can turn into a Dynamesh and just start sculpting. And then I can, like, when I'm happy with the placement, I can just do C plugin, subtool master, mirror. It will mirror that across the x-axis. And then if this is now in Dynamesh, yeah, I can just recompute the Dynamesh. It will merge it back down, so it will be part of the mesh. It's an excellent feature, and I can just sculpt, 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 and just start shaping the air, just standard sculpting, recompute the Dynamesh. So it's just to get like geometry in there. Whoops. Yeah. So let's make some horns. Just to get some geometry in there, it's really great. All right, now I should have activated symmetry though. Okay. But there are no rules for this. You could have also, I wouldn't necessarily have had to insert anything. I could just I can use the snake hook, drag things out. So if I wanted a quick air, I could also just drag it out. It'd probably be just as easy. And then just keep BCB, just, whoops. Why is it? Oh, I'm in mRGB, not CAD. Okay. So the brush was set to mRGB and CAD was off. So I can't sculpt. It's just adding paint information. So I had to be in CAD again. Yeah. So, you know. So we do have, I don't know if I showed you, but we do have some features for BI. Like for instance, there's a insert body parts. It can be useful, like if you're quickly roughing out a concept and you just want to pop an air there, and then just control drag and make that a part of the Dynamesh. And now you have an air and you keep sculpting. And then honestly, I kind of like it. And then you can sculpt and, now I have an air quickly. And then you can do BI and then press M. You have different body parts. You could do an arm there. Yeah, so I didn't use that for this character just because it's sort of a sculpting exercise. So obviously I don't want you to only be resorting to these, but sometimes they're very efficient, obviously. So you can add pre-made, even if you have some pre-made meshes that you already, that you previously made, you can obviously start with that as your starting point instead of always starting from a sphere. But to me, it's sort of like you're limiting yourself a little bit. It feels like chances are, yeah, I think you will free up your work more if you shouldn't rely on these pre-made meshes. If you do choose to add something like this for your final portfolio piece, this is something that would be absolutely crucial that you mention in the report. Obviously. So any sort of pre-made scripts or anything that's facilitating the production, you can, obviously, because it wouldn't necessarily mean that you would probably tweak it a lot. So I'm not saying that it's like forbidden to do, but I really encourage you to try to build from scratch and play around with anatomy, and if not, we're not learning. We're just copying and putting stuff in there. So yeah, so that's inserting stuff and extracting and doing the T-pose, or I'm sorry, doing the Transpose Master to add a dynamic pose. And then you would do like, but I would just refer you back to the previous lecture when I briefly talked about the BPR render passes, because you can also find, if you YouTube search like BPR render pass workflow, there's some different artists have different ways of doing it. Some are really clever. The the basics is that you click here and you send it to Photoshop, and you can add also various light sources, and then do an additive blending mode in Photoshop. Then you literally have a way of adding lights on top of each other in Photoshop. So I showed that in the previous lecture, so you just watch that when we did the bust. What else? Do you have any questions? No. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So they should be like just taken to a completed secondary stage like this guy. Not like this guy, but you, uh, huh? Yeah, yeah, that's fine. I'll put it on the server. Yeah, so just take it to a stage where you're happy with it. Uh, that's it. Just secondary detail just means this holds up at this distance. But if I go in here and see that I don't have a lot of tertiary detail, it's still relatively rough. But uh, yeah. So when you're handing in the maquettes, it should be as far as you want to take it. Don't worry too much about it. But it's like it needs to be more than a blob because these are all training assignments, right? So it should be that you've spent some time doing a little bit of anatomical reference search and you applied it in your work. It's all towards your final portfolio piece, where that's where you sort of show it all. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Do it. Yeah, so yeah, you can if you want to. Yeah, if you want to add more in here. Yeah, if you want to submit everything, you can. Just put, so it should be like this. It should be images in ZBrush. Same deal. So you put A2, put, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. I don't care too much, honestly, as long as I have the images, but it's nice having the files here, don't you think? Just, yeah. Again, this will not really be assessed too carefully. It's really, you have to do it to fill the workload of the course, and it's meant for you to do to be able to work, to make your final work. Yeah. So you're doing these assignments for yourself, really, you know, and then they will be pass or fail, and if you don't do them, then you can't pass the course. Yeah, so if you want to do more, you can do more. Yeah, put them all in there. I would encourage you to do more. This is again applying time. So again and again, I just keep saying it's all about just work. Sounds really boring, but it really is. It's just like anything else. Okay, so if I have a defined mouth and then you want to open the mouth? Yeah. Okay, so we'll address that quickly. Well, it's sculpting again, but I could use masking. So probably you want to do some reference search to see where the jaw would what would be the pivot point of the jaw? You know, where does the jaw pivot from? So, you know, that'll probably be up here, but you can do some reference search and figure that out. And then you could do masking. So, but again, it would just be sculpting. So you'd have to sculpt a version of this with an open mouth, you know. So there's no automatic process, but masking would certainly help. So I would mask, I could turn off perspective for this. Carefully make a mask where the jaw is, sort of like that. Is symmetry on? No, it's not. Turn on symmetry. So yeah, just completely mask off the upper jaw. Then yeah, that would all be affected, I think. So this, why isn't that, okay. Oh, he's rotated, right? So we obviously want to do this on the symmetrical model. But quickly, let me just show you here. So then you would mask. You would do this not on the post model, but on the symmetrical one. So now I have the mask. I can control click a lot to blur the mask, but I really want to make sure that I'm not moving the upper jaw. Whoops. So it would be some labor. Probably spend some time getting that mask just right. Yeah. So, but essentially then where would it pivot from? Let's see. And then go to rotate. Whoops. I keep doing that. Rotate. Whoops. Okay, let me mask off this. Oops. Mm-hmm. Yep. But it helps actually opening the jaw first a little because the jaw would need to be open for the mouth to be open if you already had an established form. But you know, I could have made the initial sculpt with the intention of having the mouth slightly open. And then see that we already sort of have it. And then I could now recompute the dynamesh. So now the projection takes a lot longer because it's a full body and they have more resolution. And then carefully I can go in and make a mask. Then invert the mask again. And I use the transpose tools and then move so I can push that in. And then recompute again. Yep. So probably, yeah, it's easier to do earlier, right? But it's okay. Oh, but this is a good point because you do need to think about that, you know, in your final render. If you're just doing a presentation render, and that is essentially what we're doing, but we're making a production-ready mesh. So if you want him to be able to open his mouth, you would need to create the mouth. But yeah, so you'd spend a lot of time sculpting the lips to reference search. Takes effort. Okay, so smooth. Add, this will look strange, but we need teeth in there. I would add, you know, yeah, so append cube. There's the tooth. I can move it. Oops. So the transpose tools are kind of nice to quickly scale. So I'm actually using move. We can also use the insert brush though. It's quicker. But once I have one subtool in there, the other one will just be a copy of this, be much quicker. With the insert brush there would have been quicker. I could have inserted a cube. Just to get a mesh in there. This stuff you could also do in Maya if you really wanted to. Export the mesh and then, So, whoops, Dynamesh. Looking nice. Yeah, but essentially that's how you do it. So you add the gums, the teeth, the tongue could be a different mesh. So it's just, again, applying time and sculpting. But it would require a lot more attention in the primary stage because this shape is not, it would be a different shape. So, yep. See if I can. Oh, so if you control shift drag, you can isolate regions. If I control shift alt drag, I can remove regions. It's just visually, because initially when you control shift, the select rectangle tool is active. We also, I think I showed you yesterday, we have the trim rectangular. This will actually trim. So now this is active on control shift. So if I just now want to be working on the head, I can do, I trim that part off. Now it's just gone from the Dynamesh. And I'm back to the bust. And then I recompute. Yeah, so essentially it would be back to doing a lot of work here. Let me. Back to sculpting. So I like having these gray materials when I sculpt because it's just easier to see what I'm doing. So here maybe the trim dynamic would have been very useful, I think, for me, because I can start just doing like a planar thing to rough in where that shape needs to be for the lips. I don't know what sort of lips you should have. If there should be thin lips or thicker lips. Can isolate, oops, wrong tool. So again, I can turn it back to the select rectangular. So now this will be the one that's active when I do this. And that's just to isolate. So I can be focusing in on this region and only work on the lips. So again, probably have like a few references handy. So BTD, trim dynamic, which is kind of nice. I like trim dynamic sometimes for this. And then more intensity on the smooth. Whoops, not that much. Yeah, so all these shapes do require attention, right? It's just no shortcuts. Clay buildup. Whoops. Yeah, keep adding volume, keep subtracting volume. A trim dynamic I use just to do like a planar, just to get these forms sort of roughed in. See that? It's really great for that. Just do like a planar approach. So now we have that basic geometry. And then you start, and I can also do like pinch. I could pinch this area. And if I wanted to make the lips thinner, could do a pinch, lower C intensity, just pinch the whole lip together. Yeah, so you keep going, and then move. Use move a lot too, move tool. Faces are tricky, is it so minute changes? It doesn't take much to really make a disturbing image, because we're so used to reacting to faces, we're very finely tuned if something's like a little off. So faces are particularly like crucial, obviously, to get right, but also difficult because we're so. Oh, I need to turn off the lacy mouse feature. Yep. Yeah, so it would just be a lot of sculpting, just like anything else. So adding all the cavities, you would do some reference search to the teeth also, like make a set of teeth. You have a lot of work ahead of you. Should be fun. It's fun stuff. You obviously need a mouth, so that was a great point. In your concept sculpt, you can choose to have a closed mouth, but then at some point, when we're making the production model, we probably do want a mouth cavity. So that was an excellent point. So if you want to include that in your concept sculpt or not, that's up to you. But then, if you didn't, then probably we'd have to do that when we start thinking about the production model, because in the production model, we do want to have the ability to open the mouth, most likely, unless it's a statue or something, which it could also be. So I'm not telling you that you have to do anything. Okay, other questions? Yep. Or the eyeballs? Oh, the lids. Yeah. So same thing. We just need a cavity in there. So you just leave a closed mesh. No holes in the mesh. You just pull in, and then what we're going to be working with in the. Let me see. Let me do this. The production model will literally. Let me turn on display properties double so we can see the back faces. It will literally be like this. It will be just like also the same for the mouth cavity. So this is pretty useful actually. Another good point. So I could do, I'm trying to turn on back face mask, which, let me see, if I do, will it inflate this one? No. Okay. Oops. Well, okay, but we could carefully work with this. Let me see. There's another way to mask things, which is not working. Okay. Yeah, but anyway, so we'd carefully work with this, constructing just a closed mesh like you see for the mouth cavity and also the eye sockets. And then that will be great for lighting because you don't have light. If you had an open mesh, the light could penetrate that. So you don't want light penetrating inside of your model. So closed mesh, and then for the balls, you literally would have just spheres. And you can also spend more time in the production mesh if you wanted to, like build like a really realistic eye if you wanted to. You have spend some time. You can also sculpt the iris, see how far you want to take it. It's eyes are pretty interesting too. But so anyways, so yeah, good question. That's how you just do that. Final things? Concerns? All good? Okay, so then going forward, like I said, you have to just structure your time. Please work. Don't hold off with starting the sculpts You have to work pretty independently, but Andre is available occasionally, but this is more like for you to be working, sculpting, help each other out as well. Ask each other for like opinions. If you want to show each other your work, that would be nice. And I will see you October 5th. And that will be, like I said, pretty technical. So have fun, sculpt away. Should be good.